Now, folks, back we go to an item that we carried on the show yesterday. Father Patrick Moore, parish priest of Castlepollard in the county of Westmeath, was responding to the results of a recent survey carried out by the Children's Ombudsman, where 34% of those surveyed, all school children by the way, want more religion in their classrooms, not less, and only 3% wished to see religious education removed entirely from the curriculum. Now, Father Patrick, who has been and continues to be an advocate for faith-based education, has welcomed the findings of the survey. Let's just play a little clip of what he had to say on the show yesterday.
But it's still God's world, and we know what God says to us, that each one of us has to stand before his judgment seat and give an account of ourselves for what we did, good or bad, in our bodies. So we would be very foolish if we weren't preparing for that by being faith and morals formed, and particularly at tender ages like the youngsters in the adolescent time. They are formed in the primary school to the level of childhood, but then when they move into adolescence, they need further faith and moral formation to sustain them. I know of this because I was involved in that for over 20 years myself, and it was very productive in the context of the VECs at the time. Very, very productive. The worship of God on Sunday is a priority. After all, it's the third commandment of God. And also, the parents have to get their priorities right. For instance, the God of sport, which is well worshipped now on a Sunday, takes away the youngsters from serving Mass through training and games. I support all that the sports are about, but I do not support them doing that on Sunday mornings, putting the worship of sport ahead of the worship of God, our Father, and Jesus Christ.
That's Father Patrick Moore, who guested on the show yesterday. Well, a lot of you called in and made contact on this topic, but I've picked out this email from Brendan. I feel it deserves to be aired. He writes, "Hi Joe, when it comes to religion in school, what is wrong with the majority preference applying? Do the majority have any rights? Why should the minority have to be catered for if it's at the expense of the majority? Why should the majority be decimated? I accept that if the majority in a school don't want Catholic religion, well then that is okay. The majority, at election time, get the government they prefer. The minority may not be happy with the outcome of the vote, but we don't hear any argument about inclusivity or discrimination or isolation or a multicultural society or diversity. While we have a diversity in TDs, they don't form a government if they're in the minority. They don't have a case for diversity or discrimination. You make the argument that because Catholic religion is not part of the Irish legislation in schools, this is sufficient justification for its exclusion, even where there is a majority in its favour. That's a Cavan listener, and you make your points. They're well-made, caller. But the question is, do we have a majority that are in favour of maintaining a Catholic ethos or a Christian ethos in our schools? I don't know the answer to that question. By the way, I was asked by a listener yesterday to check the status of Christianity in the Constitution, and right now it is my understanding that the Constitution of Ireland says that the state may not endorse any particular religion and guarantees freedom of religion. Just thought I'd share that line with you this morning. Now, John Hamill is living here in the Shannonside Northern Sound region. He's guested on the show many, many times. He's a former officer at Atheist Ireland, and I felt it important maybe to invite John onto the show to hear the other side of this debate. And I know you've had the opportunity, John, thank you first of all for joining us. I know you've had the opportunity to listen to Father Patrick Moore's contribution to the show yesterday. So young children want more religious teaching in the classroom. What are your thoughts? What is your reaction to the findings of this survey?
Yeah, well, firstly, good morning, Joe, and thanks for the opportunity. And you're right, I did listen to Father Moore yesterday. I think he's right that the moral foundation of our children is a very important issue. I guess the question that Father Moore, I think, needs to address is that not everyone shares his morality. So I happen to believe that the teachings of Catholicism, and for example, the way they discriminate against women and against gay people, are immoral. And really that comes back to the majoritarian argument that you articulated from your correspondent. In other words, does the majority religious denomination in the country get to impose their religiosity on the minority? And there's a very good answer to that, actually. So the provisions in the Constitution around freedom of religion that you read out, they come from human rights law that was defined after the Second World War. And what human rights law says is it's basically a response to the defences that were offered by those defending the crimes committed during that war. And the defences included, we didn't break any laws. We had a Christian majority who passed these laws that said we're allowed to do the following things to, for example, a Jewish minority. We didn't break any laws. And what human rights law says is, well, actually, we need to defend minorities from the tyranny of the majority. And even if a certain group, racial or religious group, is in the majority, there's certain things that they just can't vote to do against minorities. And that's something that was argued in the North, for example, within living memory. We had a Protestant parliament for a Protestant people, but the Catholic minority was perfectly able to make the argument that actually just because you're in the majority doesn't mean you can abridge the rights of minorities. And the same thing's true in our education system today.
But there are many, and I can see the calls and the text messages coming in here already, who believe that Christianity, this country, many would argue, was built on its foundations, are linked, inextricably linked to Christianity.
Yes, that's true, and there are lots of signs of that around the country. I think you travel the country, you see, for example, lots of grottos and statues. Lots of our schools are named after saints and have Christian symbols on them. And I think as a cultural artifact, if you like, I wouldn't insist on changing all of those things. A lot of religious denominations made a very significant contribution to the education system in this country, especially in the earlier years of the country. The fact that that might persist throughout the country today, I don't think is something that I would insist on changing, but that's quite different from Father Moore saying that he gets to impose his religiosity on other people's children. So we can ask the question, Joe, for example, if you consider all of the marriages that took place in Catholic churches last year, how many of those marriages were conducted by women? The answer is 0. How many of those marriages included a gay couple? The answer is 0. That's because Christianity teaches against gay marriage. It teaches that the creator of the universe gets very upset if a woman wants to be a priest. The people who believe that are perfectly entitled to believe that. But what they're not entitled to do is tax the non-religious and then use those state funds to impose their religiosity on other people's children.
Right. Now, I don't know, maybe I should have checked this out before this morning's discussion. In relation to this survey, I don't know if the religion that those who participated in the survey was exclusively Catholic or Christian. I don't know that. I think, I'm sure maybe all religions and different denominations were probably in people's minds when they participated in the survey. But given the role that Christianity played in the foundation of the state and in many ways the formation of the state, does it not deserve special status even if it's now in the minority, and I'm not saying it is, I don't know, I have the figures, but I'm sure I'm right in saying that those who have a religion in this country, the vast majority, for them, it would be Christianity, it would be Christian.
Yes, I agree with that, Joe. I think firstly, it's very difficult for kids to understand the world around them without knowing something about religion. So you can't understand literature, Shakespeare, for example, without understanding a little bit about religion. You can't understand current affairs without knowing the difference between, for example, Judaism and Islam. And in particular, kids should obviously know the history of their own country, and it's impossible to understand the culture in which they're growing up in without knowing something about Christianity. But that's very different from saying this particular religion is true and other religions are false. That's very different from saying, for example, the creator of the universe is watching everything that you do, and you have to go and confess your sins to a strange man dressed in black, or else he's going to burn you in hell forever. I mean, understanding the context in which you're growing up, understanding the influence that Christianity has had in your culture is very different from telling people that this particular religion is true and this is what you have to do because a particular magic book says so.
In relation to our schools, and I mentioned yesterday that divestment is underway. The process of divesting some, not all of our schools is underway, and the Catholic Church is to the fore on that. There are those who, as I said yesterday, have been quite critical of the Church because they feel that process is moving at a snail's pace. In your view, is it a case of where all state schools, the Catholic ethos, the Christian ethos should be removed, and the focus in the classroom should, of course, in relation to history and whatever, religion, of course, will be discussed and mentioned and talked about, but that religion has no place in the classroom? That's your view, is it?
Yeah, well, I think firstly what you described in terms of the current situation, I think is quite accurate, Joe. Just to put a couple of integers on it, there are around 3,000 Catholic schools, primary schools in Ireland. There's just over 100 multi-denominational, just over 100 Church of Ireland. And it was in 2012 when Rory Quinn was the then Minister for Education. He had this divestment target of 400 schools, 400 of the 3,000 Catholic schools to be divested before 2030. So we're now 2/3 of the way through that time frame. And of the 400 that he anticipated being divested, we have seen 12 divested. So I think it's absolutely accurate to say things are proceeding at a snail's pace. And the ideas that Father Moore presented around the Catholic domination of the education system being under threat, I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. But I mean, I don't think all Catholicism needs to be removed from schools. It just can't be imposed on people who don't want it. And there's a number of ways to facilitate that. So, for example, the Forum on Patronage suggested that the Catholic class could be the last one on a Friday, or you do your faith formation and your sacramental preparation the last class on a Friday, and the people who are interested in preparing for communion can sit in that class, and those who aren't can go on home. There's lots of possible solutions to this, but at the minute what we continue to do is we use state funds to impose the doctrines of one religious denomination on everyone else's children.
Okay. Interesting. It's, again, very interesting in that the Sunday school model, when that model was put to Father Moore yesterday, he wasn't ruling it out. That, I felt, was very, very interesting. 087 1200 900 is our text and WhatsApp number. By the way, the Sunday school model, very similar in a way to what John is suggesting there, maybe John's point, it would make more sense from the point of view of parents and picking children up and that kind of thing. Friday evening would be the last class. Friday evening would be the religious class. And that would mean those who do not want to participate would be allowed out early or allowed home early. And maybe the alternative to that, if that doesn't work, is something like the Sunday school model. And we got a lot of calls in from listeners who have been part of the Sunday school model when growing up, and it worked very, very well for them. And one or two who we were chatting to yesterday were making the point that it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense for the children, and it also makes perfect sense for parents. But I think in this day and age, and I don't want to trivialise religion in any way, but if you were to say to parents, no, you have to get up early on Sunday morning and take your children to Sunday school, I don't know how the children would react to that, and I don't know how the parents would react to that. John Hamill, thank you indeed for your contribution this morning. Very, very interesting.